Once again, the internet finds itself at the center of chaos. On one side, legal battles, threats of bans, and dramatic accusations of espionage are setting the stage for a heated showdown. On the other, social media giants are making some eyebrow-raising moves, promising to dial back censorship while stirring up just as much controversy as ever. It seems like the worlds of tech and politics are colliding once more, with no shortage of drama and bold promises. What's really happening behind the scenes? It's unclear for now, but one thing's for sure. This is a story you won't want to miss. What if I told you that 170 million Americans could wake up tomorrow to find one of their favorite apps completely vanished? That's exactly what's at stake as the Supreme Court races to decide the fate of TikTok in what might be their fastest-moving case ever.
Let me break down why this is such an unprecedented situation. We're talking about potentially forcing the most downloaded app in America to completely separate from its Chinese parent company, ByteDance, or face a total ban.
You know what's fascinating about this case? The Supreme Court has just 9 days to make a decision that could reshape how we think about technology, national security, and free speech. That's lightning fast for a court that usually takes months to deliberate.
Speaking of which, the classified evidence the Biden administration submitted must be pretty compelling for them to fast-track this so dramatically.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The government is claiming Beijing could potentially use TikTok's vast data collection for espionage or blackmail. We're talking about everything from location data to personal information from millions of Americans.
But let's consider the business impact here. How many content creators and businesses have built their entire livelihoods around this platform?
That's exactly what makes this so complex. You've got this massive ecosystem, influencers, advertisers, small businesses, all potentially facing disruption. And get this, TikTok's lawyers are arguing that Congress didn't even consider less restrictive alternatives before jumping straight to a ban.
Well, what's really caught my attention is this unlikely alliance forming against the ban. You've got Rand Paul and Ed Markey, politicians who rarely agree on anything, both arguing this could violate First Amendment rights.
Oh, and here's another twist that's making waves. Trump's complete 180-degree turn on TikTok. I mean, he went from trying to ban it during his first term to recently hosting the CEO at Mar-a-Lago and saying he has a warm spot in his heart for the platform.
That shift in position really shows how the political dynamics have evolved, doesn't it?
Absolutely right. And, here's something else to consider. This case could set huge precedents for how we handle all foreign-owned tech companies. If TikTok can be banned, what happens to other platforms with international ownership?
Let me play devil's advocate, though. Don't we already have precedent for blocking foreign technology when there are national security concerns?
Well, yes, but the scale here is unprecedented. We're talking about removing an app that's become deeply integrated into American culture and commerce. The government needs to prove that the specific threat from Chinese ownership outweighs these massive economic and social impacts.
You know what's particularly striking? The timing of all this. Forcing a decision right before a presidential transition.
That's right, and it raises some serious questions about the political motivations behind the timeline. Congress specifically set this January 19th deadline, as Mitch McConnell pointed out, to ensure it would be handled by the current administration.
So, what do you think this means for the future of social media regulation in America?
Look, this case is really forcing us to confront some fundamental questions about how we balance innovation, security, and free speech in the digital age. Whatever the Supreme Court decides will likely become the blueprint for how we handle similar cases in the future.
And with technology evolving so rapidly, we're bound to see more cases like this.
You know what's really going to be interesting to watch? How this affects international business relationships. I mean, if we can essentially force a company to sell itself or leave the country, that sends a pretty strong message to foreign investors.
That's such an important point about the broader implications for international business.
Well, as we wrap up here, I think the key thing to watch is not just the court's decision, but how it shapes the future landscape of technology regulation. This isn't just about TikTok anymore. It's about setting the rules for how technology, national security, and free speech will interact in our increasingly connected world. But TikTok is just one piece of a much larger picture. While one of the most popular apps fights for its survival in American courts, another tech giant, Meta, is taking a completely different approach. Under Mark Zuckerberg's leadership, the company has announced revolutionary changes aimed at reducing censorship and promoting free speech. How are these two events connected? They highlight a clash of two ideologies. Where do we draw the line between security and freedom? TikTok's battle and Meta's move toward open dialogue raise new questions about how technology shapes society and what consequences this holds for all of us. Social media as we know it is about to change forever. Meta just announced they're completely dismantling their fact-checking program, and it's going to affect how billions of people consume information online.
The timing of this shift is remarkable, especially considering Meta's previous stance on content moderation. What prompted such a dramatic change?
Well, it's fascinating because Zuckerberg actually provided some concrete numbers. He mentioned that even a tiny 1% error rate in their content moderation affects millions of users, and that's become unacceptable to them.
That's quite a departure from their previous approach, where they invested heavily in those complex moderation systems.
You know what's really telling? They're physically relocating their trust and safety teams from Silicon Valley to Texas. It's like they're literally moving away from the tech bubble mindset.
And bringing in some interesting new leadership too. Dana White from UFC, Joel Kaplan with his Republican connections. That's quite a shift from having Nick Clegg, a former European politician, at the helm.
Speaking of Europe, Zuckerberg specifically called them out as stifling innovation with their censorship laws. That's pretty bold considering the EU is one of their biggest markets.
The financial implications must be significant. How do you think this affects their bottom line?
Well, look at the numbers. Meta's already committed $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund, and they're essentially betting that this new approach will help them compete better with X, which has seen increased engagement since implementing community notes.
Though I wonder about the practical implementation of these community notes. They're saying they'll require agreement between people with different perspectives.
Right? And here's what's really interesting about that. They're not just copying X's system, they're trying to improve it by focusing on what Zuckerberg calls mainstream discourse, while still maintaining strict policies on serious violations like terrorism and exploitation.
So they're essentially creating a two-tier moderation system.
Exactly, and get this, they're also reversing their 2021 decision to reduce political content. Now they're actually going to recommend more political content across Facebook, Instagram, and Threads.
That's quite a gamble considering how polarized social media has become.
You know what this reminds me of? The Arab Spring era, when everyone thought social media was this incredible force for democracy. Now we're seeing this complete pivot in how these platforms view their role in public discourse.
The international dimension is fascinating too. They're positioning themselves against not just European regulations, but also pushing back against censorship pressure from Latin American courts and China.
And here's the kicker. They're doing all this while actively working to repair their relationship with Trump, the same person they banned for 2 years after January 6th. Talk about a strategic pivot.
It really shows how much the political landscape has shifted since 2016.
Looking ahead, I think we're going to see other platforms follow suit. When the market leader makes a move this dramatic, it tends to create a domino effect.
These changes are going to reshape how billions of people interact online.
That's right, and before we wrap up, here's what everyone should watch for. How these community notes actually work in practice, whether this leads to better discourse or more chaos, and how Meta navigates international regulations while pushing this new free speech agenda.
Sounds like we'll have plenty to discuss in the coming months.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into what might be the biggest shift in social media since, well, social media began.